Today we're going to be covering Italy and Ireland. Last week was the UK and Portugal. We're very pleased to present two speakers like last week who've flown all the way in from the Veneto region and also from Galway, Ireland. Maurizio Rossi of H-Farm Ventures, Italy's leading accelerator. Maurizio, welcome. And John Breslin, professor, lecturer at NUI Galway in informatics and engineering, and also director of boards.ie and a serial entrepreneur out of Ireland who I've known for some time. Just to give a quick overview of what the home pages, websites of our speakers look like, we invite you to check them out, visit them. That's H-Farm and boards.ie. Sorry, got a little clip there on the left, together with NUI Galway. So the themes we'll be touching on today are essentially differences between Italy and Ireland, lessons learned at H-Farm, boards.ie, NUI Galway, a little bit about commercialization, university tech transfer, entrepreneurship and innovation ecosystems in Ireland and Italy as well, personal career transitions from engineers, hacker to professor, from business person to senior executive to entrepreneur investor in their respective cases. Enough of the course instructor. It's time to get to the real action, which are the two speakers. First is going to present Maurizio Rossi of H-Farm Ventures, who's come a very long way from the Venice region. You can actually stand outside Maurizio's front door and look across the lagoon at Venice. It's very, very cool. I've been there. It's a great operation he has. So Maurizio, while I bring up the slides, please go ahead.
Okay. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm pretty much excited to be among you to share my experience and our H-Farm experience with you. So this is going ahead. Okay. So if you flip down your head, as you can see also my partner. So me and Ricardo, I'm Maurizio Rossi, I'm the co-founder. And going back here, so to tell you in 2 words, what do? We define ourselves a venture incubator. Basically, we are focused in the digital space. So from, say, web, mobile, application platform. So we do invest in startup, both B2B or B2C models. But especially H-Farm is an environment. And this is probably of the most important thing that belongs to H-Farm. That's the human factor. We've been inspired by the concept to put the human as a centric factor. Going back to 2005, we thought that the human in the industrial era was just, with those technologies, part of a process. And now, with this new shift and with these new technologies that are coming, the human has to be centric to face the new challenges, and technologies has to be designed around the human. So for us, this is an inspiration. This addresses our philosophy. Every day we wake up and we try to do everything according with this philosophy. It appears also in our brand. Our brand is H-Farm. It's human farm. And the farm is the home of entrepreneurs. And unfortunately, you can see it's too dark, this slide. But anyway, we are based in the middle of a farm. So the human factor for us wasn't a marketing manifesto. We decided to create this environment into a real natural place. We are surrounded by over 1,000 hectares of nature. It's a huge farmland, but it's very connected to the world. We're not like in Alaska. We are just 5 minutes away. You see there the dot, the blue dot of an international airport, and 50 minutes from a train station. and just 10 miles away from Venice, which is probably the most beautiful city in the world. Venice is in the northeast side of the country. At the northeast of Italy, it's economically the most performing. It's a sort of Silicon Valley of Italy. It's a lot of traditions. It's over 1,000 years that we always been involved with the trade and then with the business, with the industry. So it's very performing. So that's where we are based. We do two things: accelerate and incubate this new business. So on the acceleration, is basically we do more or less what any incubators or accelerator does, like working on a business planning and a business model, but providing a solid mentorship, coaching the startups to reach the market as soon as possible. So getting partnership, try to optimize the resources that's always limited, money and time. And yeah, that's two. And talking about H-Farm is not like considering an usual accelerator, like imagine co-working space. For us, as I mentioned before, it's matter of an environment. And we have contamination is the most important thing that happens in the day life. We have 8 buildings and 12 small cubicle houses. So we have this seed village, and those houses fit for 6 to 8 people. And then we have different buildings with different spaces that get shared. We have 2 huge places like this one. This is a greenhouse lounge that we're going to use as a restaurant at lunchtime or breakfast in the morning, but it's an open meeting area for everybody. And this can host over a couple hundred people. And the second part of our job, because in 2 words, is we are the venture incubators, so investment and acceleration. So on investment, we have a strategy that's addressed by 2 directions. We have one direction is more venture-driven. We do invest in seed and early stage startup, and we possibly invest together with our co-investors on venture capital, and our investments are always minority stake, and we work up to 20–30%. And the investment size is ranging between 200–300K per investment. And we do invest in the company that we accelerate. But we also invest in some other startups that are not necessarily driven by venture capital, but are more, let's say, focused to fix maybe domestic problem, and they want to be profitable. So the venture-driven model is based on capital gain. So we need to find an exit to get our money back. The other model is just to invest in some companies that could be created and supported through industrial partner instead of the venture money. And in that case, it's less aggressive for capital gain, and the focus is to just making profit, maybe after 2 years to have a company becoming profitable. In that case, our stake and our governance into the startup is higher. So this is coming according with our country, with the culture of our country, and with the experience we have after 7 years, because we started in 2005 to do this. Deal flow, it's the feel of our engine. On 2011, we worked out over 1,000 applications, and this year we expect, I don't want to say we double, but we expect something over 1,500 new applications. And the storming pizza is something that I suggest to do also here, because it's an important step of our deal flow. On bi-monthly, it's a format, it's a very casual demo pitch event. And we host this event internally and also inside the university. And basically, this demo pitch, it's shared with an open brainstorm with the attendees. Usually, we have 100, 120 people. Half of them comes from the environment, the edge farm, but half of the invitations are people from outside. It's students, entrepreneurs, anybody. And after the demo pitch, we're going to have a pizza, and we're going to brainstorm and networking, very casual, but it's pretty much effective. So we share the company that we will invest also with people, unknown people, to say, because sometimes it's coming, the good questions is coming from an unexpected. And someone we just invited is coming there to say, hey, tell me about this. So 7X, this is important because this pays the bills, of course. In 7 years, we reach 7 exits, but also we learn really a lot by doing those exits. Because here we are in Silicon Valley, this is the marketplace, this is where the technology and the startup is an industry. But going outside of Silicon Valley is completely different. All of you should travel, should get in Europe. There was the regions, that was amazing because you can see from that picture how fragmented are the cultures around Europe and how this fragmentation impact in the business of doing startup. So these 7 exits took back a lot of money for us, but also we learned how to do our job. Okay, well, next, going more in details. Digital academia. We found a natural, since we are an environment, last year to launch a project focused in the entrepreneurship. And we thought to create a master in digital economics entrepreneurship. It's 15 to 20 students every season. So we try now to have 2 in this coming year. And they are taught by 75 teachers, but most of them are entrepreneurs and professional people. And those students, they experiment very, very close what it means to run a startup. They also stage for 3 months inside the startup of our incubators. And the best 3 of them, they get the access to the startup program with their own ideas, like a prize. And this is a extremely important program because it's really interconnected, and it helps to create environment, to create a digital culture inside Age Farm. Age Camp, I mentioned before. Age Camp is basically our startup program. So it's a program where we deliver a number of services, including accommodation and food. So for the 3 months period, people get there, and similar what Ufadi did it here with Black Box, they can stay, they sleep there, and we deliver food. Just a little ticket in cash for 3 months. It's not necessarily a lot of money to develop a prototype. It's mostly as all accelerator. And we take then a 10% of stake. And international school, yeah, kids. Going back to the human factor, if we need to change the world, and we need to have the new generations, we have to deliver not just the tools, but also the new learning system if you really want the next generation going to change the world through the technologies. So next year, we will launch a digital international school starting from the early years that then going to connect with the digital academia. Dreaming a district. Yes, even going back to our philosophy and to the influence, because what we are creating here, it's going behind Age Farm. We are inspired by the idea to create a human thinking park, to have our mindset go over what we're doing. We are growing. Today we are 300 people, 37 investments. Next week start an extra 10 new startups starting the next program. So among the exit, 5 companies decided to remain inside the environment. So we can grow maybe 1,000 people. But this land is so big that 45 farmhouses are there ready to host more companies, more business, more people. So we want to be the driver as mindset for our business that want to get there. So this is our dream. This is something that drives our growth.
This is all part of your property? You own all those?
Excuse me?
Did you guys own all the farmhouses as part of the property?
Not the entire. We own our ownership. We have a real estate company that took over a piece of land, and we have 8 buildings and the village. But all the entire land, it's the owner is an insurance company, and there are 42 houses, farmhouses that are destroyed, so it has to be rebuilt. So they liked what we did, and they say, well, if we take back, there is a military base. And we have been in IDC in Tel Aviv 2 weeks ago, which is an interdisciplinary center, and it is inside a former aviation military base. And we have the same here. And one of the programs we have here, I didn't mention, is Big Rock. Big Rock is a training center for 3D animations. A lot of people that works in Pixar, DreamWorks, are coming from Big Rock. And we have a dream to create a studio, but this production studio for cartoons or for any digital animation, but the production coming from students. So to get like a school becoming a production house, not just have a school and then the production becoming business, a school just be a training center. So try to melt those two. So we need support from larger investment in real estate. It's not our core business to do real estate. But for us, the environment, the way how we rebuild things, how we create it, all of you are invited in Italy and to pass through H Farm, because you have the feeling of the best of Italy, because Italy is well known for design, is well known for details, and you find all these elements in H Farm, from the food you can get and the chairs you sit, and everything is very, very curated in details, because that belongs to our culture, you know. So, finish.
Thank you. No, we're Q&A.
Here.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So basic format is we're going to do some Q&A for each speaker and then bring them both up at the end of the lecture 2 for kind of a joint Italy-Ireland Q&A. Who wants to kick off? Yes?
What are the terms of your investments like?
The investment size?
The terms of the investments, so like do you take equity in the companies?
Yeah. Well, the company we get into the HCAMP program and then the acceleration program, let's say the venture, we start with the 10% from a seed investment plus the conversion of the service, and then we increase our investment about 300K per company, and we increase, of course, our stake probably 20-25%, but then we get diluted once we bring aboard venture capital. They're going to put the serious money, because we do not invest in the Series A. If we go into the other program of investment, that's a, let's say, direct company or holding model or industrial model, you know, we can call in different ways. Investment might be larger size and stake much higher because they're not VC driven. We do not expect in that case to have company reaching an exit. Maybe that might happen, but the goal is to reach a profitability in the shorter period of time as possible.
Yes, ma'am.
to select the startup to join the
Yeah.
camp, or like, what is the strategy to select?
You know, it's we have, of course, a focus on certain areas, certain ideas according with trends. But what we learn after 7 years, it's we invest in person, in team, because we have a group of people, mentors, partners, young people, because the most important side, part of the selection comes out of people like you, because you deal with the technology better than senior people, of course. And we work in the ideas. We provide then support with business model and everything, but in the end, the decision of investments, especially even after the 3 months period, comes to the people, because we invest in entrepreneur. Startups have to pivot. Startups, you know, it's a never start in a way and get there. Maybe just few. So it's just a matter of people to be able to pivot, to understand the positioning, to understand everything. So it's something ongoing, you know, it's something that you see how the person, the team react with the results, how they take the decision. Sometimes decision can be strong decision, like to pivot, to change, to stop, to do something different, or maybe to be ready because it's coming investor and to leave the country and maybe moving away. And not all entrepreneurs, in my opinion, are in the position maybe to leave one of those European regions to come here. It's easy to say, I want to go to Silicon Valley. It's not so easy. It's you need to change completely the culture. You need really to come here. And so it's people. Basically, it's people.
Yes, ma'am.
So far, what is your average time to exit of the companies that you've seen funded?
You know, it has been pretty successful because since we had limited money and we had to stay very close to our investments. Consider that on the day first, for the first 3 years, we started H-Farm without deal flow. Because in 2005, in Italy, talking about startup was like talking about really a weird word. And to say, what does it mean, startup? So we created our own startup. And we, in some of them, invested all our money. So we had to take back the money in all. We did everything. That's why we did 7 exits, because we need to get our money back. We're not very, very aggressive because I believe that, and we proved this one, if I want to see the best, if I want to seek the next Google, I probably need to pick like a venture capital, really few startups out of a mass of startups. But what do we learn and what do we have to do in countries like Italy or like Europe, which are not like Silicon Valley, is to start respecting also small startups that maybe cannot be the next Facebook, so not very interesting maybe for venture capital, but pretty interesting for the local domestic market. They can be small but profitable. So I say honest startup. So doing that way, dealing that way, the percentage is going to be higher. I think we had an active portfolio in 2011, consider 32 investment, 7 exit, and 7 write-off, and 25 still going on and growing. So some of them are pretty big, and some are small. But before shut down a company, if there is a good guy on board, we really try to help him. And our approach is not a financial approach. Our approach is a business approach, is industrial approach, because both me and Riccardo, we learn to do venture capital because we face the problem that in Italy, there aren't venture capital. We run the largest program in the country, and we deal like a venture business, but there are just free venture capital and they do not invest. And we have people like I see Paolo Privitera, that is a brilliant Italian guy that he left the country and he's here with his startup. And he did the tour in the world because he's been in Chile, Startup Chile, he did everything because our country, unfortunately, has ecosystem to support the startupper. It's just starting now.
One more question.
Design and digital media are areas of great interest to the Nordic countries as well. And I'm just curious if you have seen any accelerators that are focused on design and doing some of the things you're doing in that part of the world. And do you have any collaborations with other parts of Europe doing what you're doing?
This is a very interesting question because I take back my friend Fadi here. Going back to last year in May, we decided to organize a meeting of accelerator incubators, let's say early stage players. For this reason, spend 2 days together because I met Fadi once in a conference, but mostly we knew about each other just reading by the blog, but we never met in person. So we decided to get a meeting and to spend 2 days to understand and learn by each other from experience, best practices. And that was curious because we created an infographic and we create a lot of information we got a lot of information about this one. And I believe that every country, you know, it's at 70% we share the models. But it's also, it's country by country because some countries support the accelerator or the incubators in terms of expenditures because there is a very strong social aspect. And they just do that work and there is maybe a strong environment for financial. But what we did, I think it's pretty unique because we started underestimating all the challenges, just inspired by the human and say, okay, this could be cool to do this one. And once we did things, it was too late to stop. Too much money has been invested and we kept going on. And we created a very, very small Silicon Valley. We had to create an ecosystem. I don't know, maybe you visited, you traveled maybe more countries, but I think so complex like H Farm, there's nothing really similar.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I don't know, you did it.
I've been extensively in northern Italy, and H Farm is definitely the most sophisticated, far-reaching operation that I've seen to date coming out of Italy. And we need to move on to our next speaker. Maurizio, thank you very much. So our next speaker is John Breslin, who's come to us all the way from the west coast of Ireland, from Galway, from NUI Galway, which means National University. I means Ireland, National University of Ireland at Galway. They recently, just a year ago, established the newest engineering building at an Irish university, which I visited back in November of 2011. It's a very impressive facility across from the business school. So this is also a leap forward for the university to bring all the different engineering departments into one facility, one campus for the first time in the history of the university. But it's also very transformative for all of Western Ireland. John Breslin.
Thank you, Burton, for the introduction. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello. I teach first year as a big class of 250, so I'm used to this kind of reaction. It's okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, as Burton termed us, professor entrepreneurs, but also to provide some context, I suppose, around what's going on in Ireland and maybe tell a few stories. So first of all, it's a pleasure and honor to be here at Stanford, and thanks, Burton, for inviting me to speak here. I was going to talk a little bit about some links between Ireland and where I am in Galway. Galway is a city, a small city in the west of Ireland, and the Bay Area. So the first one is, this is Stanford, you are here, and Menlo Park, which is right beside us here. And on the right hand side here, we have a picture of Galway, where I am. So the little star is the building Burton just talked about. That's the engineering building where I'm based. And actually, it's looking out onto a place here called Menlo. Menlo was actually the guys who came here and they bought a farm here in Menlo Park. They built a little arch over the entrance of the farm, and they wrote Menlo Park on it. And it was actually named after a castle, which is kind of just around here, Menlo Castle, and has actually a stone arch with, in this area called Menlo. Menlo is an Irish word, a Gaelic word. It means small lake or Mionloch. So it's actually the small lake here. So I'm here looking out onto Menlo, and maybe if you're up very high here in Stanford, you can look out onto Menlo Park and see the same place. We also happen to have a bay in Galway, which is just south here of the picture. Another connection between Galway and the Bay Area is this guy here. His name is Michael O'Shaughnessy. He was a civil engineer. He graduated from my university in 1884, and he was basically the San Francisco city engineer for 20 years. So he's credited with naming the Golden Gate Bridge. Actually, the Golden Gate Bridge, it celebrated its 80th anniversary just last week in terms of being built. And he would have overseen the building of that, but also a whole range of engineering projects around the Bay Area, including the Hetch Hetchy power and water system that supplies electricity and water to much of San Francisco, San Mateo, and other regions. We have a small little bridge named after O'Shaughnessy in Galway. It was just built last year, and it connects our university to another part of the city. It's a small suspension bridge. So when you see the O'Shaughnessy Boulevard or O'Shaughnessy Dam, you'll think of this guy, hopefully. Okay, so I was going to talk a little bit about myself. As an educator, engineer, and entrepreneur, and give you some background in terms of the things I do. So I teach electronics to undergrads. I teach analog and digital electronics. I've taught a range of subjects over the years, including things like web media and social media and the semantic web, which I'll talk about later on. Also, in terms of an engineer, my background is as an electronics engineer. So, you know, my PhD work was on magnetics, but a lot of my research now is on the web and social media, which I'll talk about as well in a few minutes. And then as an entrepreneur, my main involvements have been with boards.ie, which you saw a screenshot earlier on, Streamglider, adverts, and again, I'll give you a little overview of some of those. When I was a teenager, we didn't have the internet, and I suppose the internet before the internet was shortwave radio. So if you wanted to hear what was going on around the world, unfortunately you couldn't turn on your computer and find out, but what you would do is you turn on your radio and you would tune into some shortwave radio station. And it could be the Voice of America. When I was 13 or 14, I used to listen to Voice of America religiously, not for religious programs, but for the news and for the Jazz Hour, which was on in the evening time. Other stations from, could be from Italy or from Russia or wherever. And there was kind of basically like stamp collecting or coin collecting. What you would do is you would send a report into the radio stations you were listening to, saying what kind of signal you heard. And they would send back a verification to you, saying that you heard it. And you would collect these cards or verifications from the radio stations, much as you would stamps or coins. And I even sent in some radio shows to shortwave stations in the UK and Ireland, and it was a real thrill to be able to hear them back over the shortwave. It was a bit like having a web page and getting some comments back on your web page. So I went to college, and again, I'd never actually used the computer apart from maybe 1 hour with when I was in secondary school, which is the equivalent to high school. We had an Apple Lisa, and I remember one day using it. We did some programming and played Pong, and it was so exciting. But that was it until I went to college. But in college, we had mainframes. And in Galway, there was a big factory for Digital Equipment Corporation. And they made these big mainframes, and we've been donated some of these mainframes from Digital. So when I started in first year using the mainframes, you could see who was logged into the mainframe. You could see a list of users and the terminals they were logged into. And pretty quickly, I figured out that you could draw a map of these terminals. This is what's shown up here. It's basically a plan view looking down on the computer room. And then you could figure out who was sitting at what terminal, because the terminal had an ID. You can see I'm sitting here at this terminal. That's me. And some of my friends are sitting at the other terminal. So you could actually figure out who was in the room with you you kind of might know what course they were doing from a prefix. So a lot of my research is in the area of social software, and I retrospectively say this is my first social software program yeah. But they had something else on the mainframe, and I was fascinated by this. It was a bulletin board system. And basically, it was like the dial-up bulletin boards of old. And you know, it's pretty primitive looking, of course, but here we have basically discussion areas up at the top. And you can then select what discussion area you want to talk about, and then you can read the messages in there. So on the mainframe, it's OK. On the mainframe, we had email, and we had a kind of a text chat thing, like a bit like Skype chat. But this idea of having communities that could kind of talk to each other I just thought it was brilliant. So I really wanted to have my own copy of the software, and I installed it in my own space. I couldn't get other people to use it because we didn't have the privileges to do that. But I suppose it was when the web came around that we basically were able to do a lot more of this. And in 1998, I was running a computer gaming network. I was a student, a postgrad student, and I played a lot of computer games. And in parallel with this, I set up a discussion forum. And it was pretty horrible looking, I suppose, you know. And what happened was we had a lot of people playing games and talking on the forum. The forum got really, really busy. And I had to write some archiving software to try and partition off the various posts. And it got busier and busier. And gradually, the gamers didn't want to talk about computer games anymore. They wanted to talk about TV, their real lives, computers, whatever. And we added more and more forums. So we had 5 forums after a while. And then there was about 20 forums, and I had to kind of hack the software. And after a while, some of my fellow gamers said, you know, we're not just talking about games anymore. We should really have a bigger platform here, something where you could talk about anything to do with Ireland, basically. And a friend of mine proposed we should call this thing boards.ie. So we went ahead anyway. I was a student. I'll be talking about this later on, but as a student, you don't really know how to set up a company. But luckily, my fellow gamers had a company of their own, and they helped us along the process of forming a company and producing something bigger. So boards.ie, as it is now, it's one of the biggest forums in the world. You know you've made the big time when you appear on a cartoon by in XKCD. So in XKCD, they have this thing which is the map of online communities. And in the small little forums part of that big, big map, I'm not sure if you've seen this before, but it's a map that shows things like Facebook and Twitter and kind of how big they are on this virtual map. But down here in the bottom corner, there's a little part of a country called boards.ie. But basically, you've got about 1,000 forums talking about everything from politics and TV and soccer and mustard and Chuck Norris and life hacking and beer guts and personal issues, whatever your fancy is in there, you can talk about it. We also have commercial forums called Talk To forums. So because Boards is quite big in Ireland at the moment, there's about 30 to 40% of the Irish population uses it. Ireland's a small country. There's a population of about 4.5 million. But about a third or more of the population uses this. A lot of the companies in Ireland have commercial forums where you can talk to these companies. You can talk to Vodafone or the electricity company or Curry's, which is an electricity, it's a computer and electronic devices outlet. You can talk to all of these companies on these Talk To forums. It's also been amazing to see kind of the things that spin out of community sites. We've had people getting married, having kids. We've had soccer teams being formed, drama groups, photography, albums being published, all kinds of things. So it's fantastic to have this kind of range of stuff spinning out as well as companies and so on. One of our spin-off companies is something called adverts.ie. So we had a for sale forum. It got very, very big, and a forum isn't really the best place to buy and sell stuff. And then we spun out a separate classified site, which is quite busy as well. So I lecture at NUI Galway, and NUI Galway is the university in the west of Ireland. It's got a couple of interesting trivia. Martin Sheen, who you know is the actor, studied there a few years ago. Tolkien, of course, hobbits are in the news at the moment. Tolkien was one of our external examiners. George Johnson Stoney, who came up with the term electron, was a professor at the university. And actually, the first female engineer in the world is attributed to have graduated from NUI Galway in 1906. So I lectured there for some years. And then when my contract ended, a new institute was being established at Galway called Derry. And Derry was supposed to research the web and next generation web. And I joined Derry, and I kind of didn't really know what I was going to be working on because my background was in electronics, and I kind of imagined I'd be doing something with electronic systems, getting them to talk to each other, because Derry's work was on semantics, which is basically meaning, and it's coming up with a common meaning for things. But around the same time when I joined Derry in 2004, social networks were just emerging. So, Facebook was kind of in the background, but Orkut and Friendster and various social networking sites were actually appearing. And because I've been involved in boards, the whole area of social networks and online communities seemed to kind of mesh together, and I started researching social networks. So you saw this logo just a few seconds ago, but one of the things I was working on was something called Shock. And Shock was basically a common semantic format to describe social websites. And it's been deployed on about 22,000 different websites at the moment. So it kind of consists of sort of common terms for social websites. You can see them up here in the red. Things like posts and forums and user accounts. They're kind of common across most social websites. And if you look at various sites, like ones that are powered by Drupal, which is a content management system on the web, like energy.gov, and if you view the web page source, you'll see some terms from Shock, which is something I made, and it's great to see this basically data format kind of spreading across the web. More recently, I co-founded a company called Streamglider. Streamglider is it's a real-time newsreader for the iPad that basically has different modes of operation. It can be a kind of a grid mode, a magazine mode, but it can also be white labeled for different companies who want to publish their own newsreader for the iPad. And that's in conjunction with Nova Spivak, who's from here in California, Bill McDaniel, who's in Texas, and it's invested by Irish Tech Capital, who are based here in the Valley. It's a real around-the-world effort. Well, I'm in Galway, one person's in Texas, another person's in California. Our developers are in Russia, so there's real time zone fun there to try and coordinate everything. So just a little bit about Ireland and kind of the context around where I am. And from my perspective, Ireland has changed immensely over the past 40 years. 40 years ago, Ireland joined the European Union. Up until that stage, it was quite a closed, in terms of trade, country, and a very poor country, I would say. And it took about 20 years after we joined the European Union before Ireland caught up with its European neighbours. I remember in 1983, I moved from Dublin, which is our capital city, to the country, and we had one of these little wind-up phones. It was like the Waltons. You'd wind up the handle on the side, and you would get through to the switchboard, and you would say, I want to speak to whoever. And that was 10 years after the mobile phone had made its first call. And it was only until 1993 that things started to pick up, and in the 90s, things definitely changed. And that's kind of reflected, I'll show you in a few minutes, through our education system. But now, where we are, there's a lot of foreign companies in Ireland. 1,000 foreign companies, about 6,000 jobs were created in Ireland last year from foreign companies. And mainly in the kind of the tech sectors. You can see them here. ICT, 10 out of the 10 top tech companies are in Ireland. Medical devices, again, a huge range of companies there. And pharma. Half of all of our exports from Ireland are from pharma, 55 billion, which is it's an amazing figure. IDA is our government body that's responsible for bringing companies into Ireland. And of course, the reasons for this, we have a very low corporation tax. We've got talent, which we say is very skilled, but also quite creative, and a good standard of life, according to the OECD. So I mentioned education. And here we are in Ireland. For a long time in Ireland, we only had 4 universities, plus a seminary for priests. And that was all the way up until the 1970s, when, well, 1960, somebody decided to actually establish some more colleges around Ireland, because only 4 universities. It was quite elitist to try and get into university. There was a low chance you would actually get a third level qualification. And then in the 70s, well, we had 2 more universities established around that time. But they then established all of these colleges around the country. And that had a huge effect on the education. Now, again, it took maybe 10, 20 years for that really to kick in. But you see in this next slide the numbers. So basically in...
John,
yeah.
can you just explain
Sure.
what ROI means in this?
Of course, yeah. ROI is basically the Republic of Ireland, so that's the independent country, I suppose, that was formed after Ireland split into Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, which remained part of the United Kingdom. So Burton mentioned earlier on, Northern Ireland is basically a region within the UK. So actually the universities in the north, which are Queen's and University of Ulster, you have a speaker from IntelliSense coming from University of Ulster, would fall under the British university system. Yeah. Okay, so in terms of the numbers, in 1991, the people who had third level qualification in Ireland was 14%. And in 2011, that had jumped to 31%. So it almost, actually more than doubled within a period of 20 years. And that kind of brought us up to norms in terms of education standards around the world. We still have I think a kind of a small number of universities per capita population, but in terms of what's happening, I think it's much improved. 2/3 of those working in ICT have a 3rd level qualification, but there's still a huge number of jobs available in the tech sector. A lot of companies are complaining they can't get the skilled people. And this is despite things like we've had a 40% increase in computer science graduates over the past 4 years. There's still a lot of scope there for jobs. Yeah.
And John, that's
Yes.
pretty
Unique in Europe, is it not, to have countries with this numbers of jobs going unfilled in the face of huge...
The tech sector has continued to grow. So, in the past few years, we've had stats about the tech sector growing where all the other sectors have
Yeah,
contracted.
but Spain doesn't have this level of jobs going unfilled. Portugal,
No,
Italy.
but it's only tech jobs because we still have a quite high level of unemployment compared to previous years. So,
Okay.
where we would have had an unemployment level of around 10%, now we're at 14-15%. So, but the tech sector is still booming, and of course, we've seen the influx of companies. So, that's part of it. So I mentioned the establishment of the different colleges. In parallel, the government established various centres of research excellence to try and bring up the research levels as well. And just to give you an example, this is the one I was affiliated with, which is Derry, which is up here. It was basically a greenfield site. 10 years ago, 2003, there was no semantic web research in Galway. Now, 10 years later, it's the top semantic web group in the world. So they established these various centres around the country. There's a few more not listed here, mainly in the bio and in the ICT space. And of course, a source of professor entrepreneurs as well. There's been a lot of growth initiatives in Ireland as well to try and increase skills and connectivity and networking opportunities for people who have ideas. And they range from, Maurizio mentioned young people earlier on. Young people are very important. We have an initiative that came out of Ireland called Coder Dojo. And Coder Dojo was established 2 years ago, basically to teach programming to kids. And they're run every weekend, and there's actually now, after 2 years, there's 134 Coder Dojos around the world in 22 countries. There's 1 year is here in the Valley. We've got hacker spaces. You might be familiar with hacker spaces here, basically where people can create and build things. There's been a huge bunch of these established in Ireland over the past 2 years. We've got technology networks, things like the ITLG. One of the previous speakers, John Hartnett, is the founder of the ITLG. We have Connect Ireland, which is an initiative from the government. So if you bring a company to Ireland that establishes jobs, you get a reward. It's like a bounty, I suppose, from the government for doing that. We have things like the Web Summit, the biggest tech summit in Europe, which is held in Ireland every year. Open Ireland, which is trying to increase the Irish population, but also the skilled population in Ireland by increasing the number of tech visas and increasing visas for the top, I think, 250 universities. That's an initiative that's ongoing at the moment. So you can see a range of those anyway.
Can you just go back, John?
Sure.
I have a comment. So here in the Valley, when we think about entrepreneurial innovation ecosystems, we generally tend to think of for-profit entities, so startups, corporations, investor groups, investment banks. This slide is real important because it shows, in the context of one country, the importance of not-for-profit entities being very important parts of building out innovation entrepreneurial ecosystems at a national level. And you don't see this evenly distributed across Europe. I think Ireland and the UK have much more intense engagement of the not-for-profit sector, foundations, civic organizations, working with the government, working with private sector, working with industry, looking at some of those cultural issues, language. Here we see the Irish diaspora. One of the reasons I wanted Italy and Ireland together is between the two of them, the Italian and Irish diasporas are huge in the United States and are a very important source of both training, expertise, culture, capital going back into Italy and Ireland, funding new companies, but also funding companies from those countries coming here. So innovation ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems also include, very importantly, in some countries, a very strong community of not-for-profit organizations too.
Okay, thanks, Burton. And another point is a lot of these were just formed in the past 5 years. I think when the recession hit and people were looking for more opportunities to try and bring people together, these have emerged. Incubators and investments. So we've had Maurizio talking about H-Farm. There's a bunch of incubators ranging from university-based incubators to third-party ones. Things like Dogpatch Labs. You may have heard 2 days ago, Dogpatch announced they were increasing their activities in Dublin and reducing the activities in the US. They see Dublin as being kind of a place where there's a lot of opportunity, where it's kind of, I suppose, maybe less crowded in terms of what they want to do. We've got Startup Bootcamp, which is from Techstars, Wayra, which is from Telefonica O2. And then in terms of investment, we have the likes of Enterprise Ireland. Enterprise Ireland are basically the government agency for funding Indigenous Irish companies. And they are in conjunction with a bunch of VCs rolling out funds to companies in Ireland. So you can see the ones underlined here in green are ones that are co-funded by Enterprise Ireland. We have Invest NI, one of our core sponsors in the north, and you can see a whole range of the VCs operating in both the north and the south of Ireland. So then back to me, I suppose, in terms of interactions with the community, I would see kind of different things that a person in academia should be doing. One is working with students, but also not just teaching your students or doing research with my PhD students, but trying to interact with the broader student community. And there's a couple of initiatives we have in Galway that I was going to mention. One is called the Explore project. Explore basically is the university and the Students' Union fund €1,000, which is about $1,300 for staff student projects. So basically, we write a project proposal and they fund us for that amount. The one that I've running at the moment is called Exponential. It's basically a student entrepreneur connector. It's an entrepreneur comes and talks about their company in a casual setting, maybe in a bar, and then the student can go up afterwards and have a chat with the entrepreneur and find out how to do something. So, if I come back to look at myself in boards.ie when I was forming my company, I was lucky I found some gamers who had previously run a company. If I hadn't had that, that never would have happened. So this is an opportunity for the students to connect with the entrepreneurs and learn how to do things. We have an app development competition, which is run by the university, but also in conjunction with local companies. So there's 3 startup companies are looking for talented people, and they are helping to mentor the competition. They run workshops to help people to develop apps, and then we have a group and an individual winner of that. Obviously involved with companies, but also just giving talks and disseminating information to the various groups locally is another important part of the academic. I mentioned various initiatives in Ireland to try and network and connect people together, but individuals are very important as well. And we have a lot of Irish entrepreneurs who are doing great things. We have the Collisons here in the Valley who formed Stripe. We have Aidan Cullen who formed StatCounter, one of the biggest web statistics measurement systems on the web. We've got MCore, which is basically a 3D printing company. They recently announced a big deal with Staples, where you'll be able to do 3D printing from your local Staples here in the US. And I run a blog called Technology Voice, where I like to kind of talk and promote about these Irish innovators, but also put it in kind of a global context to show that there is good stuff going on in Ireland, but here's what's going on in the rest of the world. So if you're interested, you can have a look at the website, technologyvoice.com. With that, I will leave it and say thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Just for scheduling, we're going to run over a few minutes till about 5:40 because we still need to get into Q&A for John, and then I'd like to bring Maurizio and John up together. So if the students who need to take off at 5:30, you're welcome, of course, to do so. Questions for John? Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier the increase in the tech sector in Ireland, but to what extent do you think that that's mainly an administrative role, bit for tax reasons, on expansion in Europe, or not?
There's a couple of things. So obviously there is a tax element to it. Okay, so it's very attractive, but there's also a lot of advantages to Ireland's placement in Europe. So we kind of say we're between Europe and the US. It's almost as easy to get to the US as it is to get to some parts of Europe. So there's tax reasons, there's location reasons, there's language. Obviously, being an English-speaking country is a big thing. So there's a number of reasons why. And obviously, I mentioned the skill and the education. I think it's kind of, I suppose, a number of factors to contribute towards that.
Yes, sir.
Are you partnering with any US-based incubators like in the Valley for swapping startups that are interested in the US?
So in San Jose, there's an incubator called the Irish Innovation Centre, and that, yeah, so that would be, I suppose, where some Irish startups go. But you know, various Irish people have, I suppose, gone to other startups as well in the valley and in the city. So in terms of other partnerships, I can't think of any offhand now.
Play or an SGSB or Fountain Patchery or any of those things. You don't do anything like that.
No, they aren't in Ireland yet. No, yeah. But who knows?
Hold on. Any question? Another question from this side? Okay.
I was wondering if you see a lot of startups coming out of semantic web research, and you focus more on social media and so on. I know in Norway there's been a strong interest in semantic web for a number of years, but it's focused on the oil industry.
Yeah, sure, yeah, yeah.
And I'm sure in other parts of Europe there's all the kinds of emphasis on semantic web. So are you seeing startups coming out of the semantic web, or is it still too early?
I think it depends on the companies that are in the area. So you mentioned Norway. Actually, I hosted a group of delegates from Norway a few years ago from the oil industry to look at semantic web technologies. But in Ireland, there's a couple of things. So one is that we have a couple of startups I mentioned from, well, I didn't actually mention, but I showed on the slide, where from our own institute there's been startups from the semantic space. But we work with not only our own startups, but also with local SMEs and also with multinationals. So where we are in Ireland, a lot of the work is around collaborative software. So we have Cisco as one of our partners. They have a big R&D facility beside us in Galway. We have Avaya, our nearby us. There's another company called Storm that does a lot of work with collaboration platforms. So I think it kind of depends on the companies that are in your ecosystem and what they need to use semantic technologies for. Obviously in Norway, oil and gas is the big thing. So you know, trying to make sense of data there is what your semantic technologies are for. So I guess it kind of depends, I think, on the ecosystem, the type of companies that are probably happen to be around you. I suppose just in our case, it seems to be mainly around social, but also around sensors is another kind of big area that we do work with.
Is the EU also putting a lot of money into web?
The EU is still putting quite a bit into this area. So you know, about half of our money comes from the European Union. The rest comes from the Irish government.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Stuart.
So could you comment about how your experience of straddling academia and entrepreneurship outside of the university in the Irish context?
Okay, so in my own university, we have basically a 10% arrangement that we can spend 10% of our time on non-academic, you know, external consultancy or external commercial work. In other universities in Ireland, it's a little bit higher. It's 20%, so you can spend 1 day a week. And for that, what you have to do is you have to basically kind of decide for the year ahead what you're going to be working on. So you kind of say, I'm going to spend this many days on this project and that many days on that. So it is quite well documented, I suppose, in terms of what you're going to be doing. And I suppose from my perspective, you know, the companies I've been involved in haven't really had the same sort of problems that others may have with IP. So boards is kind of a discussion forum, and there wasn't any kind of, it was done when I was a student anyway, but it depends, I suppose, on the type of company, what you're doing, and you know, what arrangements. I know in my own university, sometimes the commercial terms were a little bit off-putting because you know, the university basically kind of owns everything, and the inventor is kind of left with very little. They've started to adjust that in the past few years. So one of my postdocs set up a company which is a music discovery, and he was basically using a big kind of semantic linked graph to help discover music. And he renegotiated a new contract with the university that kind of has become a model for future companies to use. So it's kind of, it's emerging, you know, but again, because as Maurizio mentioned, you know, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, startup, kind of what's that? It's really only the past 5 years that these kind of new models have started to emerge.
John, Maurizio got a question on this design issue. How important is design looked at within the Galway region, within the University of Galway, as a separate emerging competency area or an area of importance for startups, reduce failure rates? And I don't mean the arts and architecture, traditional kind of design, which Ireland's very strong on, but design thinking, product design, what we do here at Stanford Engineering School and mechanical engineering.
So I think a lot of universities in the world will be inspired by the D School and kind of the things that come out of the likes of IDEO and so on. And I know when we had our new engineering building, one of the tasks I was tasked with was try and come up with an innovative engineering room where you could actually have the kind of the whiteboard embedded room, and you could reconfigure and you could sort of, I suppose, encompass some of the kind of design thinking. In my own university, there isn't really a large design group, but a lot of the research institutes have realized design is really important. Like, we've done all this kind of basic research, we can build all these systems, but if they look rubbish, no one's going to use them. So our university has a collaboration with the University of Limerick, which is basically south of Galway, and they have a big interaction design group there. So that kind of facilitates some opportunities for design. That's more kind of from the software and user interface side of things, but no, it's definitely become increasingly important. I know our research institute, Derry, has created a user interface and design group, and again, that's more from the computing side, but yeah, definitely a huge need for it.
Maurizio, do you care to?
So this is an opportunity to talk a bit more broadly about Europe, Italy-Ireland dynamic. Let's see, who wants to start? Any non-Italians, non-Irish? I know we have some Swedes in the audience. I won't point in the right direction.
Hands up, non-Italians and non-Irish in the audience. There's a few.
So how often, Maurizio, do you see or see connections happening between the Venice region, Veneto region, and Ireland, either in the startup sector or investment or with universities? Is that a bridge that exists or that's used frequently or being built out today between Venice,
Italy and Ireland?
Italy, Ireland, or at least the Venice region, Veneto, and Dublin and Galway, in terms of the deal flow, companies, professors you run across? Is that something that often comes across your plate?
No, actually, there isn't, I would say, something or almost in between H-Farm and Ireland. But I have some friends that are highlighting more and more that Ireland is becoming really very interesting. There is a bank in Italy which is based in Ireland, and there is one of these person that is promoting quite a lot. He told me it's maybe next month, within a couple of months I'll be there, and we'll meet, of course, because he came and he told me, hey, Ireland, it's becoming very interesting for startupping because the government is putting attention. There is all things you mentioned here. It's because I think that whole small countries, you see Singapore, you see Switzerland, you see Israel, you see Ireland, you can take easily control in maybe if you want to promote and doing something. We've been pretty active in our country with the new digital agenda, try to do something. But the problem of a country which is anyway bigger, things gonna be sort of slower. So I think that as H-Farm, I believe, especially after today with you and with the digital academia and H-Farm, we can start to do something. But at the moment, I don't see, especially in the region. That's I don't know. It's do you think there is
at the kind of the
with Venice,
at the business level,
except of tourists?
Yeah. I know we have a lot of collaborations with Italy. So we have a big team in our institute which actually comes from Italy, and they form a startup in the kind of semantic search space. But we also do a lot of collaborations.
Pisa, Turin.
Yeah.
Trento.
Actually, I'm working on a research project which is due tomorrow, which is with an Italian university. And there's in terms of European projects do a lot in terms of bringing disparate groups together who would normally connect. So we've a lot of projects with Italian universities and companies. Telecom Italia do a lot of work in the semantic, social, and sensor space. We've worked quite closely with them. In fact, they had a center in Berkeley near here for some time as well. So I think it kind of depends on the space as well. Maybe it's
yeah. But maybe you're dealing with Pisa, Trento, those universities.
Yeah.
Yeah.
John, in the startup community in Ireland that you connect with, or investor university, how often do you run across an Italian-Irish connection? Is that more an exception than a mainstream thread?
I guess it probably is, yeah. I can't think of a startup that, well, apart from the one I know that spun out of Derry, which is formed by an Italian person. The institute I'm in is quite multinational. There's 27 countries represented in that one institute. So it's, it's like the United Nations. And I suppose the likelihood is you're going to get somebody forming a startup who's from a country, and one happens to be from Italy. But I can't think of any offhand from a kind of an Irish-Italy hybrid. But I'm sure as soon as I leave, I will think of one, and I will tweet it out, so we can all see it.
Yes, Anne.
I was just wondering, in your respective countries, what would be on your wish list when it comes to the university management for promoting a more entrepreneurial culture in the universities? What would be on your wish list there, or is it already entrepreneurial enough?
So yeah, as kind of academic, maybe I'll say, so obviously I'm kind of limited in how much entrepreneurial things I can do, but I'm happy enough with that. I like to have the mix of teaching and research, and whether it's 10%, 20%, that's fine. But Burton makes a point about student entrepreneurs quite regularly, and I know in our university, I don't think we do student entrepreneurs very well. I mentioned the Explore project, which is kind of starting to do this, but there's still a long way to go. So we know that students can form a company as good as anybody, and my boards experience was kind of an ad hoc thing that happened to me just because of where I was playing games and made us form whatever. But you can actually kind of help people along the way, help those students to actually overcome that hurdle of, well, what do I do here? How do I form a company? What's legal? What's accountancy? So maybe myself and Burton were talking about this earlier on, but maybe if the universities can, I suppose, help to encourage those student-led companies rather than just the postdocs or the PhDs or the professors, I think that would be a good step. And that's kind of emerging. Like the universities never really knew that, because they never really, when I started as an academic 13 years ago, research was only kind of emerging. And now, of course, it's all research and spin-outs. And again, this opportunity, I suppose, is only emerging now as well when we look back at the likes of the companies that come from the Valley. So it's just a learning experience, but it's still something that can be done now.
Yeah. Well, in Italy, the university system is pretty old school. So you can consider that they have maybe some good labs, especially in technologies or research. So you can find some very, very, very good technologies, but there is not really a process that easily, go to the market. So we are promoting together with University of Venice a program that's called Contamination Lab. And that's a program that we try to transfer our experience and creating something sized for university, because creating an incubator and accelerator for a go-to-market is very complicated, because it's really an headache to do stuff like cage farm. But something that can be really close, especially in if we consider digital, it's much easier to try to get some project becoming reality. So with the University of Venice, we propose this contamination lab. The prototype will be created in digital academia. And the director, and you met the director, he will promote together with our directors of universities. Yeah, I think it's, we still have a lot to do. It's a don't consider in Italy system like here in the US and like in Ireland. It's we have some brilliant students, they do good things, but or they leave the country, or they do application age farm, or they have a really hard life to stay in the country.
One of the big differences between many European countries and Silicon Valley, and particularly with Stanford, is that when they talk about university commercialization and spin-outs, it's postdocs and PhDs for the most part. It's the research lab stuff. And so the undergrads and masters, by and large, really get neglected. They don't live in dormitories in many public universities in Europe, because you're supposed to live at home with your parents or somewhere else off campus. And so the numbers you see coming out of public universities in Ireland, for example, is a year. The official ones out of the laboratories is maybe 3 to 4 on average, with a couple of universities maybe doing 6. They're not even counting the unofficial spin-out startups created by the masters and undergrads, the app companies or whatever, because those aren't research-based. They don't count under EU or Dublin or OECD policy. And this is a real, I think, mistake that European universities are making, and innovation policy in Europe is making, is that it's not taking the students seriously, particularly the undergrads and master's level students. We have time for one more question.
So I've been running a nonprofit here in the US for 10 years. It's an incubator and funding project focused on undergraduates at public universities. And the biggest problem that I find in the public universities here in the US is finding teams. I can find individuals that have great ideas, engineers that are building technology, but they don't know what to do with it. Do you find that you have students coming to you as individuals? Do you find it hard to build teams? How do you find those teams to build a company? Because in my experience, one person does not make a company.
It's the person who makes the team is the entrepreneur. So that's the quality that a person needs to have to build a team around an idea. Because the idea, it's something that you can maybe change in just in 6 months' time, you know, once you roll out the idea. But as you say, one person doesn't make a company, and the entrepreneur, it could be 1 or 2, sometimes could be 2 people, so one is more technician, another one is more business oriented. But that's the attitude that is necessarily to get a startup. Otherwise, it's going to be a case of study. So you can study, but there is a difference once you want to make something serious. Maybe you can do it with really $10,000. It doesn't mean you need to have millions, you know, of investments. But it's starting, you know, once you find a key and you turn a key and you start to do something. So that's the element. I can understand that within a non-profit space, it's, or maybe in the past it was more difficult to engage an entrepreneur than now. Maybe now it's because they're less challenged by making a profit. But if you have to do business, you solve the challenge, and you know, and you.
John, any closing?
So I think it's kind of harder for undergraduates to form teams, as you probably have experienced. And I know from teaching first years, I got all my first years, well, I didn't actually, I put my first years into teams, and I asked one person from a team to give a presentation about their topic. And even at that, it was very hard for them to pick the one person out of 10 to present, because they find it difficult to present and to kind of, you know, talk about their ideas in front of other people. For the Code Ninja thing, which I mentioned there, a competition we ran last year for app development, we had an individual and a team-based project. And this year we thought maybe we'll just do all team projects, but then we kind of knew it's going to be hard for them to form teams. They won't really know who to talk to and who's good at what and whatever. And then we thought, well, maybe we can do this kind of startup weekend mode where, you know, in startup weekend you pitch your idea and then teams kind of form around those people who pitch the ideas. But even still, we were still a little bit worried that the undergraduates might not pitch, or they, you know, and enough wouldn't pitch to actually form those teams, because they're kind of at a different level than the people who attend startup weekends, who would be, you know, more confident, I suppose. So in some respects, there's almost kind of a little bit of coaching or training or showing what's kind of expected to kind of get that pitch and that kind of team formation needed, I think. So we are hoping to do that, that pitching team formation thing this year, is try and see the teams and kind of get them further along than they would be if they're just trying to kind of naturally form, spontaneously form during a semester.
Maurizio, John, thank you very much for coming to Stanford.